Hello, everyone, and welcome to the public space. Today we have the debate we've been talking about since 2 weeks, the white pill versus black pill debate. How are you doing, Frame Games, and are you ready for this?
I'm ready for this. I want to try to spread a little love and cheer people up, and hopefully, Team White Pill is. Hope you guys will come around to Team White Pill tonight. Come with me. It's the way of the light, the way of the white. How are you doing, JF?
I'm doing good. It's amazing. You're the one who gets most critique for being too nihilistic and too black pilling. I've seen a lot in the alt-right people saying Frame Games is essentially trying to put us in a state of despair. But in the end, when we talk, you and I, for hours, we discover clearly that I'm the most nihilistic of us both.
Yeah, it comes out in these weird spots where, we'll be having this conversation, and then the depth, like the thing that's deep inside your soul, will come out, and it will just kind of like, whoa. Like I guess I'm sort of black pilled on like the factual things from in that, and I wouldn't even call it black pill. I would just say that I sort of sleep in the trenches of like what's going on and try to chronicle it, but I try to keep my soul white pilled. You are like straight out of like a French novel, like a Sartre. Like it's the depth of it is impressive.
Absolutely, and I can't wait for that depth to be tested. So today, how it will work, we have 5 subjects. On every subject, Frame Games will be defending a kind of hopeful version of it. I will be defending a non-hopeful version of it. The first subject is Trump. Does he represent America's renaissance or just a dead cat bounce? The second subject is America's domestic policy. The third subject is foreign policy. The fourth subject is white people. I cannot believe Frame Games that after doing these videos with me where you do the Frame Games report, where you show that white people will become a minority, that today you are defending the white pill version on that question. And the fifth question is future technologies' impact on mankind, biology, AI, my subject of predilection. I don't think you can win that fifth one. I'm writing a book on that, but I can't wait to see what you have to say on this. And on every round, you guys on the chat will be voting. It will be like 1 for Frame Games or 2 for JF, 1 for the white pill and 2 for the black pill. Which one you found most convincing or most, somehow it touched you more. You felt that argument better. And before we move to this, just a very quick look at the news. Sweden is under attack by what is described as youth gangs. Sweden has been subject of heavy immigration policies for the last few years, and there is currently a coordinated attack by gangs. They are throwing Molotov fires. At least 15 cars have been set on fire in at least 3 different cities in Sweden. And I was looking at the Omarosa thing. I cannot wait to do a solo JF show. I think it's going to be Wednesday or Thursday. We will review the history of Omarosa and her betrayal of Trump with her new book.
You all know him as the president. I know him as a friend. I know his heart.
But since she was fired in December, she's turned on President Trump, and now in her new book, she calls the president a racist, a bigot, and a misogynist.
Omarosa has been doing this since I know her. I know Omarosa since the days of The Apprentice. This is what she does. She is a true nihilist. I think we would go well together, her and I. She keeps betraying everyone at every step for her own advancement, and now she's decided that Trump was a racist. All right, Frame Games, did you have anything to say on this, or do you want to start with the subject?
A few things. I mean, Omarosa, she swings back, but then she swings forward. So, it could be that 2 weeks from now, after a little payoff money or after she gets her limelight, she sort of recants it all and then joins back up with the administration. You never really know with her. And then with the Sweden thing, those youths, man, they're really young. I guess that's the
I saw a lot of Twitter memes of guys being like, youth. Yeah. That's probably their main characteristic. They are young.
Pattern recognition, I think, aspect of it. But I think one of the mods acutely, very keenly picked up the little anchoring. I'm well aware, JF, of your techniques here. Okay, you started with Sweden. All right, and let it be known that anchoring effect is noted.
Oh yeah, I'm kind of cheating because in my news segment, I am already making a case for my own side of the debate. I've always done so. I've always cheated. I remember doing a news segment on Count Dankula and saying, Count Dankula is about to go to jail. The guy is a criminal. Just to set myself some sort of advance in the interview and the debate.
So nice. You always be closing. I like that. You're always positioning that. All right. So do you want me to start with the first topic with Trump? Should we go right into it?
All right. Trump. Does he represent America's renaissance or just a dead cat bounce? As a reminder, audience, pay attention to the two arguments. Pay attention to what we say. And you will have to vote at the end of the round.
Right. Okay. So let me just begin by saying that this was not supposed to happen. If the Blackpill version of history were true, then this would have been lost already. Before Trump, things were going down all the way around, okay, in Europe, in America, and there was always this sense that since 1965, that there was no going back to a Trumpian version. And Trump already represents an against the odds version of things. Now, the reason that we framed this as, well, is it a renaissance or a dead cat bounce, is because there is this stock market phenomenon where when big things fall, they don't fall linearly down. There's often something called a dead cat bounce, which is that if you were to drop a cat off of a 100-story building, then it would still die, but it would bounce a little bit before it did. And there are an incredible number of things that Trump is doing behind the scenes that are extremely white-pilling that I think don't get enough credit on our side of the movement. For one, he has already reversed a significant amount of the affirmative action policies that were done by executive order from Barack Obama. So it's unclear if that is going to continue here. I can send you some links as I sort of go through this stuff in case you want to pull it up on the screen. And I didn't prepare a formal presentation for this today, so I didn't give you sort of the source references, but here you go. I will just do affirmative action. Trump. Here you go. This is New York Times, July 3rd, and I will throw this up in the lobby for you in a second. Maybe pull that up there. But he is reversing Obama on affirmative action. He is reversing the Community Reinvestment Act aspects of diversity industry activists being able to crush the banks and distort a lot of the commercial investments that we've talked about. Here, I just found the link right here. Chat and send. Okay, so that is from the New York Times just a month ago. And if you can't access the New York Times, you can just you can delete the S in the HTTPS and type in outline.com beforehand. So I'll send you another link of that. But a lot of these race-based policies that we have been chronicling are under threat by the Trump administration, rescinding a lot of what has come before us in that respect. You have everything from Black and Hispanic support for Trump rising, as recent polls show. You have a 9-point swing that's happened with white liberal millennials. In 2016, 48% of white liberal millennials supported Democrats. That was people between, I think it's 18 and 35. But in 2018, now under the same poll, 46% say they. It went from 48% Democrats to 37% supporting Democrats. So that is a huge swing among the left-wing youths. Not the kind that set cars on fire, but the kind that we have here. So that is,
You mean there are kinds of youth?
yeah,
Don't answer this question. I was just kidding.
I don't. That's not a generalization. That's just a tongue-in-cheek, like satirical comment done in the spirit of
we do not
performance.
discriminate against young people.
all young people matter. Okay, so you have these polls which are suggesting that more and more people are resounding with the Trump message, in particular white people. You have affirmative action on the ropes. You have disparate impact, which is now being settled out of court every time somebody challenges it, because people are so afraid of having this horrible standard, which has been in existence since 1971 and contorting our commercial systems because of how afraid people are of its range. You have a Supreme Court that is now going to be potentially right-wing for like the next 30 years, especially if Ginsburg croaks. You have the Space Force potentially underway, which to me is just a beautiful thing because, of the unifying potential to be in space or to have space representation.
Wait, I want to understand what you're saying there. You're talking about space exploration?
Yeah, well, okay, so the whole Trump Space Force thing. They just declared a sixth wing of the military.
A military. Okay.
Yeah, but it's more the symbol than the it's more the form than the substance.
Mm-hmm.
The
feeling of dominating the space.
Yeah, well, there's this great quote. I think it was Reagan or someone who noted that probably the best way to resolve like race relations in the world would be if we were all to come under simultaneous attack from an alien species, because it would just to be arranged against something much bigger than yourself is something that is inherently coalition building. And I do think that just the spirit of Trump and that relentless forward march represents a real white pill. We have not, he's talking about going back to space and these big ambitious projects, things that we haven't done in 40, 50 years, and that really were a unification of humanity that are happening now. So in addition to the positive polling, a potential rollback of many of the crushing diversity industry regulations that have dominated Western culture for the past 50 years. You have jobs and economy at all-time highs, right? You have the Dow at an all-time high. You have the passage of the tax reform. You have, as a libertarian, all of those like job stifling regulations have been rolled back. He signed a number of executive orders demanding that 2 regulations be killed for every new one created. Like he literally signed an executive order that, requires for every new regulation 2 have to be repealed. Signed 15 congressional regulatory cuts. For those who are, sort of blackpilled on the rise of like the climate theocracy, he withdrew from the Obama era Paris Climate Agreement. He signed an executive order cutting the time for infrastructure permit approvals. He eliminated the Obama rules that targeted the coal industry. That's just, I don't know when you want me to stop. He's, with respect to issues affecting like white America, he's done a sort of unprecedented amount of investment in combating opioids, which is contributing to a lot of white suicide and white like pulling out of the system and dropping out. The Department of Health recently laid out a 5-point strategy to specifically combat opioids. He declared a nationwide public health emergency on the topic. He's put together a council of economic advisors that have, basically a task force on this. He's set aside $500 million to fighting the crisis over the next 3 years. He's sort of done a significant amount on that front. The DEA under Trump collected over 456 tons of opioids to get it off the streets. He's done an enormous amount to help world peace, between being sort of bringing together the North, solving the North Korea crisis, and winning over allies from Japan to Macron. He recently had the Merkel-Trump. I don't know if you saw this, but this was a pretty stunning thing. He recently got Merkel to have what the New York Times bitched about as a watered down version of Europe by getting Merkel to publicly articulate a sort of defense of Europe's borders. And I'll send you a link on that because it was pretty
Talking
cool.
about the New York Times, Amy Harmon, I don't know how to say her name, Amy Harmon called me from the New York. Oh, she sent me an email from the New York Times, and they're currently planning an article on UTR2. And they wanted to know my advice about whether Jason Kessler has succeeded and why there was so little people.
What are you going to say?
Oh, I wrote to her. I said, as far as I'm concerned, the goal of UTR2 was not to show the size of the support for the ideas of Jason Kessler. It was an act of free speech, a symbolic act by Jason Kessler, and he wanted to have the least amount of people there as long as these people were vetted and that he could control his message and what he was doing. That was the best situation for him. In fact, I said as much before the UTR2 that ultimately what Jason Kessler should want is the most uneventful little small speech, and that's exactly what he did. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a success because it puts, and that's what I told Amy Armon, since she was from the New York Times. I said, he's putting the deceptive mainstream media on the defensive, because now the deceptive mainstream media cannot argue anymore that this guy is violent or that his group wanted a violent protest. The only violence came from the counter-protester or some Antifa members. And so, to me, it's a success.
I think that's a great answer.
Now, as far as you asked about the length of your intervention, I think we can do this blood sport style. So when you feel you have finished your argument, I can answer your points and give my own.
Okay, great. So I have just 3 more points. The first is I just sent you a link to what I was talking about with respect to the defending the vision of Europe. He's getting Merkel to bend over and actually acknowledge Europe's borders, and it's something that is causing consternation to the Washington Post, saying, oh my God, she's starting to fall in line with Trump. You have Stephen Miller, who is now, as Vanity Fair just came out with an article this week, and I'll send you a link to that too, in case you want to see that.
So your article is not showing up. Merkel and Macron defend a diminished... I think I'll go straight to the Washington Post link instead of the archive. There it is. All right, so that was the article on Merkel. What was Trump's involvement in this?
I'm sorry. They were saying that they're starting to mirror Trump's public rhetoric on this thing by continuing to water down asylum and other provisions to sort of move more towards the American model espoused by Trump.
I see.
You have, the State Department is now, there was a great article here in Vanity Fair that I think I just sent you as well, that chronicles that Stephen Miller has become the shadow master at the State Department, and for the past year has been quietly gutting the U.S. refugee program, slashing the number of people allowed into the country to the lowest level in decades. And that he's been working behind the scenes, planting all of his people in all of these positions, on the phone with them all the time, and creating a successful side operation that circumvented the normal process, and he is succeeding. And then lastly, Trump has also appointed a record number of federal judges, meaning that not only do we have the Supreme Court, but the judges in the appellate system all throughout the country are going to have a Trumpian brand of politics, which will serve us well for the entirety of the next generation.
All right. So, my view on the question of Trump, is he a representation of hope? We have to distinguish what we're talking about here, because Trump is some sort of hope. Trump is the best option. And we could tend to think that the best option is kind of our only hook. And so we found all of our hopes in that. And in that sense, I don't oppose to voting for Trump and celebrating Trump. Yes, it is a good step toward the right. But the question is, first, will it be lasting? Second, is it enough? And third, are the things that we celebrate, are they sufficient? And so for the first question, to me, is it lasting? This is the history of American politics, presented as a graph of polarization, but to me it's more than this. Don't just think of this graph as polarization. Think of this graph as the dynamics of political discourse and political thought in the population of the U.S. starting in 1994. So the first thing you see between 1994 and 2004 is essentially for 10 years you have a move toward the left. The entire political spectrum moves toward the left. And then the right detaches itself from the left in 2009, and that was a backlash. The right-wing backlash occurs, you see it right here, between 2004 and 2011. And then, following the right-wing backlash, there is a solidification of the left wing. In other words, there is a left-wing backlash, a solidification of left-wing position. So this graph illustrates how consistent people respond on a form, so they can be either consistently liberal, consistently conservative. And so what we have here is the entire country is moving toward the left. The right is trying to react. And boom, the left is counter-reacting. This is what's happening in American politics, and we are within the world of the counter-reaction of the left. And the problem is, it works. The first problem is that we were already in a move toward the left, so any form of counter-reaction from the right, any form of solidification of right-wing policies, was merely bringing us back to normal, but we didn't bring the whole of America. In other words, the whole of America was moving to the left, and then we tried to pull back on the right wing, but we didn't bring back the leftists to a kind of more right wing or more centrist view. So there is a fundamental divide in America, and you can see it at the individual politician level. This is between 1950 and 2010. What do you see? It's essentially the Democrats drifting toward the left and drifting toward unanimity in their own party. So the reason the blue line gets higher and higher, it's because the Democrats used to sometimes cross the aisles and sometimes vote with the Republican. Right now, they are at 90% all the time with their own position. The Republicans are still hardliners on their Republican policy, but they always were. What's differentiating here is that the Democrat Party is becoming more and more leftist and more solidary in their voting patterns toward leftist directions. On top of it, you can observe things that are non-scientific, but that are equally telling. Things like Ocasio-Cortez, like the Young Turks, the domination of radical leftist media, and I don't say radical in terms of being extremist in terms of violence, but being radical in the sense that they know what their fight is and they don't give up. They stick to it and they know their values. The leftism is dominating America. And the question, is Trump a hope in this? Well, we have to ask, how did Trump win? And then we have to ask, can this be reproduced, or was it just a kind of bubble in the history of the US? It was a single case scenario that will not be reproduced. Now, I'm not saying that Trump will necessarily lose if he was to present himself again in 2020, but I will say that we might be in front of a last case of saving the Republican Party. The demographics are extremely disadvantageous. First, Trump didn't win the popular vote. So how did he win? He won by winning strategically certain states that were key to have the American system essentially be skewed for Republicans. Now, what holds this system together might not be perpetrated across 8 years or across 15 years. What's happening right now in America is that the left is concentrating itself into the urban lifestyle of big cities. And so you have states that are completely lost to the left. But no matter what you do and no matter what kind of policy you want to impose on this, it's an inevitable reality that the people who form the leftist base in big cities will drip. The cities are not big enough to welcome them all, and maybe sometimes it will be violence within downtown areas that will push people away, but largely independent of the reason why, these people will spread across America. And you have detailed yourself in a Frame Games report, there is still an immigration flow. And even if you fight illegal immigration the way Trump does, there doesn't seem to be a serious look at the demographics question and at how the legal immigrants will eventually replace the U.S. population right now. Whites will become a minority. That is just one symptom of this. You have yourself detailed Frame Games in a Frame Game report that Texas was about to become a blue state. I think it's unquestionable, and it's a result of these drippings, of the fact that if you concentrate leftists in a town, at some point they are driven away either by random events of their life or worse by the living conditions which become unviable. Now, Trump won 290 siege against 228. Now, this was in a situation where the entire electoral campaign was there were explosive revelations about Hillary Clinton, and the later polls and various focus groups demonstrate that yes, people have lost confidence in Hillary Clinton, and she gave the impression that the Democratic Party was working for its own good and for the good of a bunch of enriched individuals. That's what allowed Trump to slip into a very tight window. Now, Trump did it while being a reality TV star who had built a sort of political credibility across the year, not necessarily a political credibility from the perspective of an academic or journalist, but a connection with the public where he had displayed for more than 25 years that he loved America and that he wanted America to be good. So in these conditions, can this be repeated in 4 years? In 2020, maybe. And I won't stand against someone who would make that prediction. But can this be repeated in 2024? These conditions are simply not reproducible. The Democrat Party will learn from their errors. They will find better candidates. Trump is a very unique person. We will not be able to find an equivalent. And the rise of the farther and farther left that we saw on the graph will pursue. And it doesn't seem like there is anything to get out of that pushback that we are in right now of the left. So Is it reproducible? That was my first question. I would say no. Now, is it enough? That's a second question. Is what Trump does enough? Well, we see it through the demographic data. Continuing legal immigration of the kind that we have right now in the US will lead to a white minority. This is inevitable as far as we know, unless we were to use extremely drastic measure. And these are words that you said yourself, Frame Game. So white population will find themselves becoming a minority, and Trump doesn't seem to represent a strong enough force to stop these demographic facts, which emerge both from legal immigration and from the birth rate of people within the US. If there was any Trump boom to be had, we had it already, a Trump baby boom. Some people speculate that there was a peak. Maybe there was. But if there was one, we're done. We have it. And the statistics right now are not pointing toward white populations restoring some sort of majority status. We are still headed toward a minority status. Now, I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover. As far as what you present, the inspiration that Trump drives across the world, but you use the key word in describing this. Okay, he inspires Macron and Merkel. I don't deny this. But if you inspire with something that's not enough, that's a very dramatic thing, because then you're spreading a non-solution. And that's what essentially Trump is. He is a rhetorical non-solution. All of the examples that you were giving me at the beginning, they all concerned executive orders, but you know very well that executive orders don't have much reach. It's not even clear that they will change anything. If we don't change the law, if we don't adjust the way the government works, we are still headed in a more and more leftist direction. Another solution that you proposed was the school intervention. So he would have made some policies of affirmative action become less and less possible in the school system. All right, that's all good, but we're still and the white people problem with opioids. You also mentioned that there was a strong problem with opioids, and that he's giving solutions to this by investing money. But we're still talking about state-based solution. We're still talking about fundamentally leftist solution to a problem. And if you trust the state agents to be doing a good work on this, I'm very sad to see that you've left your libertarian drive there, because the state agents will just drain that money. You'll have a bunch of psychologists working on the street and acting as if they change the world, but they won't. State solutions are not good solutions. We're just gonna dump money into a world of people. And by the way, these psychologists and these social workers that you'll hire, and they'll be making a living out of your rain of money that you'll have thrown at them. These people, they have as much problems as the people they're trying to cure. That's what happens when you let state solutions dominate a domain. It will, if it helps, I'm fine, but solving the opioid problem is the least worry as far as I'm concerned. Now, as far as the inspiration of Merkel and Macron goes, precisely because Trump is not right-wing enough, this is, and the key word that you use is, they use the same rhetoric as Trump. In other words, what you're saying is that Macron and Merkel have started learning about how to phrase stuff. And that's the big dramatic situation we're in, because we made a symbol out of Trump. We're proud of him because he said beautiful things. But as far as what he did, it's not that impressive. And the problem is that other politicians, they will be able to imitate this strategy. Of course, talk rough during the electoral campaign. And then when you're stuck into the machine of the government, you realize that you don't even control your own stuff. You don't even control your own army. And ultimately, Trump found himself both in the military and in the immigration policies. Remember the wall? where's the wall at right now? I mean, so we have someone who won rhetorically. That's kind of a little white pill. It's not enough. It's getting crushed by the government machine, which has proven that Trump is not powerful enough, despite his ego, despite his bravado. We have no action. We have no concrete evolution of this country back to where it was. We haven't made America great again. Now, before the voting rounds, maybe Frame Game, if you have a reply to give to some things I said.
Sure, I'll make it quick. I think a lot of them sort of spill into the domestic policy and the white people sections, so I'll try to save those for later. But what I'll say is, you started off the rebuttal by talking about polarization data from, I think it was a BBC article, but that data, according to that graph that you showed, seemed to end in 2010. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
It ends in 2014. Here it is.
Okay, well, right. But what we're talking about is a phenomenon that rebuts that. The empirical evidence shows, and here I'll show this again from a Guardian article here if you want to take a look at it. But it shows a reversal of exactly that here in 2018. So, as I see it, you're working from data that is rebutted by the current trend rebuts that data. So you see, here, for example, it cites that today, as many white millennials support the Democrats as the Republicans, just 2 years ago, Democrats still had a 14% lead over Republicans among white millennials. And today, not only is it evened out on average, but white male millennials now actually favor Republicans by a staggering 11%. And when you especially extrapolate the fact that white males on average have more cultural power or occupy more positions of cultural influence than white females, then arguably, and remember, these are millennials, these are the youngins. White male millennials now favor Republicans over Democrats by 11%. That is a stunning reversal of that data that seemed to be the trend line up until Trump, which is why, to me, he represents a renaissance rather than a dead cat bounce. And then the last 2 points I'll just make were, is it repeatable? And on that, I'd note that if it were the case, you cited the data concerning the popular vote, and yet Trump's approval rating is now 5 points higher than Obama's was during his presidency, and approval ratings are a popular vote. When you combine the left millennial swing of whites towards Trump and the new data suggesting that Hispanics and blacks are actually rising in their support for Trump, I think you begin to see a repeatable result. And if it does repeat, you now have a precedent for every person who's a right winger for the next 30 years to cite Donald Trump as who is their admiration for the person they are running in the spirit of. So this could be the start of an army.
All right, one last comment on your data. It could be encouraging, but you have also similar articles, I will note, on women and how women have solidified on the Democrat Party. Now, we have to remember, when we look at youth, we look at really a slice of the population. And that slice of the population doesn't have as much democratic power as it should have, given that they're essentially making the decision for the society that they will be living in. My fear is that what will happen with this data is what happened in Canada for more than 20 years now. You have a little rise of a slightly different political generation, but they get crushed democratically by the old people who benefit from the state generosity to old people, or females who benefit from the state generosity through various programs. And so I'm afraid that a slice of the population rising that way is not enough. Now, are you ready for the vote?
I'm ready.
All right, so chat. Press 1 if you are white-pilled with Frame Games, and press 2 if you are black-pilled with JF.
I was going to say press F If you're with Frame Games, press F to pay respects, but you also say that when somebody dies. So maybe stay away from that.
All right, the votes are coming in. It's pretty split right now. There is a strong competition.
Oh my God.
Oh, the ones are now winning.
Oh man. All right. Hey.
All right. This is a very tight race, but I will give the point to Frame Game. Up to now, at least, unless there's like a wave of twos coming to save me. All right. It is very, very close. So it's almost a draw, but I will give that point to Frame Games. So you guys believe, or not all of you, but a big part of you believes that Trump represents America's renaissance and not a dead cat bounce. All right, Frame Games. Second ID, America's domestic policy. Will America's domestic policies get better or worse from here? So it's a future-based argument.
Right. Okay. So, next time we do this would be fun to do like every 6 months or something, like as a check-in on the world. They often do like a poll of the room on like, do you start out the argument more or less white-pilled or black-pilled on this subject? Like that would be a useful thing just to see like who moves where. But all right. So with respect to domestic policy, I'm just going to tee it up by saying that we typically, think about, the direction of America's domestic policy as sort of becoming more and more Weimarized, like, in terms of economics, it tends to become more and more socialist. In terms of the diversity industry, it tends to get more and more entangled. And so many of the points from this subject are similar to the ones that I articulated in the Trump context. And I didn't really mention, I think the foreign policy one is going to be substantially more different. But let me just, on the domestic policy aspect, I noted, for example, the jobs boom, or I noted the economic boom that we're currently experiencing. And with respect to not only is it the Dow sitting at an all-time high and the market, at levels from real estate to equities to debt becoming more and more, attractive. Well, maybe not debt, but you also see a record level of GDP growth relative to what was believed to be possible even a year ago. So there was a famous, set of CNN and Washington Post articles saying that achieving 4% GDP growth was literally impossible under the rules of economics. Trump was dreaming hell would freeze over first. And now not only have we surpassed 4% GDP, but we're on target for 5% GDP in Q3, which is incredible in terms of how the domestic policy with respect to the economic sort of system of America is churning forward from here. And a lot of that we have to thank from these libertarian type, rolling back a lot of stifling regulation, being a lot smarter about it. But I think the aspect that of domestic policy that maybe is probably the most contested and I would argue susceptible to a blackpilling philosophy that I'm going to try to preempt a bit here is exactly on things related to identity and diversity industry dynamics, which is to say that we have all witnessed the incredible growth of these domestic policies that seem to facilitate ever more diversity, affirmative action programs, racial preference programs, and whatnot. And what I want to sort of white pill people on is more the last point that I brought up with respect to Trump, which is to say that a lot of the terrible domestic policy that has been implemented, if not from the top down legislatively, but as our courts have found, is now suddenly going to be in our favor because it is very hard to get judges out of office. And now that we have Ben Carson at HUD, who is a simple but well-intentioned Republican who is not subject to the same sort of Clinton era and Bush era diversity shenanigans. He seems to be very proud of his relatively white passing, if you will, like fair-minded, libertarian-oriented philosophy. Now that he's there, you have Rand Paul playing a major power role he's become a major power broker in Congress, and he is a libertarian. I've read an article recently that he's been. Well, maybe I'll save that for the foreign policy aspect of it. But you have, now that we have control over the judiciary and the presidency, and you've seen more of the never Trumpers drop out. Even Ben Shapiro has come around to a significant amount of the Trump style politics, despite being a never Trumper. You are beginning to see a reorientation of the Republican Party in the spirit of Trumpism that could lead to the final triumph of Trumpism over neocon republicanism. The Bushes are never coming back, and that to me represents a really white-pilling future for America's domestic policy. And although we have seen the rise of this, Alexandria Cortez, however you say her name, Cortez, she is not accepted by the liberals yet. She is, I've read reports that when she went to California, like white Hollywood was very scared of how extreme her solution seemed to be. And so, she was a very small bit player representing somewhat of a fluke in one jurisdiction. Bernie Sanders was still cucked out. He does not have any real power. And it could very well be that the Democrats are the ones to come around to the Trump style domestic policy. And we meet in the middle there rather than us meeting in the middle of Ocasio-Cortez.
All right. So I hear two arguments here, one based on GDP in general and one based on the legal system and the domination of the legal system. First, on the question of the GDP, I will point out that I agree with you. The GDP is growing. So somehow our economic systems are functional. They will produce more and more stuff. Here I am with a freaking HD TV displaying a Quebec flag in my back. My grandfather couldn't have afforded this. I have plenty of stuff. I have a 4K Brio camera. I have all sorts of material. But I'm not more happy than my grandfather. Look at this graph. This shows the average GDP per capita and the average happiness. So the GDP keeps growing. Oh yeah, we're making more and more stuff. Here, do you need a second iPhone? Here's a second iPhone. But people are getting less happy. The happiness scale is going down while the GDP certainly and absolutely surely continues its route toward the upper levels. And so this tells me that there is a decoupling between the economic success of a nation and other aspects of it, those that are linked to a feeling of satisfaction. And this curve is not surprising to me. You have people seeing the economy grow in front of them, but they have no hope in their own life. People are not attached to feelings of identity, or they get shunned if they do. The religious discourse is going down, and religious solidarity. I mean, there is a nuclei of American Christians who are holding up, but Largely, we are talking about the secularization of America the same way it happened in other countries like Canada, like France, way before. And so people don't have a sense of identity. They don't have a sense of control of their government. So the government have become enemies. And we see that in measures of trust in their own party. People don't trust their own party anymore. And they don't feel like they can control the government machine to their desire. And this shows up in immigration, for example. People feel that they are getting replaced, and they don't feel like they've consented to this. And it's true, they didn't consent to this. So we have really a system that has been designed to improve economically. I don't deny this. I just say that's not enough. What we're faced, and is it maintainable? I mean, because we are with a population that is more and more pressed like a citrus. It's pressed like a lemon, and their happiness is being reduced again and again while they get richer. I don't know if this system can hold. I don't know how unhappy you need to be to eventually make a dent on the GDP line, but I would have no doubt that there is some point at which a form of resistance develops and people say, okay, nice economic system, but I don't want to participate to it. Now we can go deeper into the reasons why people feel unhappy and why the state of legality in the US is not rose at all, in my view. You talk of federal judges being named by Trump. That's beautiful. But the state judges and the trial court judges is what controls the outcomes for the people at the base. And on that scale, we are doing horrible. In family courts, we are doing horrible. So you have people who are rich. All right, I'm a man, I'm rich, I have a good job. And then I get to family court and I get a judge to violate my individual rights to keep me from seeing my children. Of course, this will show up on measures of happiness. Of course, it shows up when men who are otherwise successful, who have never committed any act of violence, find themselves in face of courts where the false allegation of their ex will determine not only their ability to parent their children, but also will eventually result in them being having their own money being taken from them to fund the new life of their ex. And so I'm not surprised that happiness drops. And as far as trial courts go, especially state courts, which control a lot of outcome, let's just cover what federal courts don't cover. Family courts, they are state-based. Civil courts of all kinds, district courts that allow for prosecuting for civil disputes. This is all the things that relate to money contracts that you enter with your friend, with your people in your neighborhood. So the state apparatus is way too big, and it's not easy to dismantle from just a Trump-like figure in the White House. In fact, I would argue it's impossible. I would argue that Trump cannot lead a campaign on family court changes or civil court reforms or reforms for domestic violence protection order. And so we find ourselves in a situation where the default family option is now celibacy, is now single mothers obtaining orders from the court to parent their children against the interest of the father and against justice, against the concept of fairness between parents. And so richness and GDP to me is absolutely hopeless. And as long as we don't have a way to fix the state apparatus that violates the rights of people, we are down to a road of exploitation and a road where people will be rich, but they will have no meaning in their life. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, just two or three quick things. So one, on the topic of divorce, I will note that the U.S. divorce rate has dropped to a 40-year low, something that is not really well known. I'll send you a source from this from Time. 1 sec here. I just dropped it in the lobby. So it does appear that the divorce epidemic that gives rise to so many problems in family court and whatnot has at least stabilized, and that many of those problems may have been flowing from the dynamics of the 1960s and the sexual revolution combined with, the contraception introduction of the 1920s, and that now there may be a reconsolidation of the modern family now that has had a few generations of evolution to it. I would note that, with respect to happiness, it's hard to. I'm not sure what data, and maybe we can talk about this in the biology section, but there are probably, biological baselines of relative happiness levels that people tend to mean revert to. And I wouldn't be surprised if people were tracking intergenerational data, that if things were not so different now than they've ever been since all of human existence. I know I've seen data suggesting that modern women are less happy than they were, like a couple generations ago. But I wonder if that's unique to just the sort of single mom problem and like being young and not having kids, but I doubt that is sort of domain general. But then the other aspect that I meant to touch on domestic policy was immigration. And that is to say that, right now, things have never been as white-pilled in our lifetimes as they have ever been with respect to the issue of immigration. If you hear Jared Taylor talk, if you hear any of the old Sam Francis, any of the old guys, they will say things have never been as good as they are now with respect to the America's climate on actually getting rid of those devastating 1965 Immigration Act changes. And from that Vanity Fair article on Stephen Miller, it looks like we're on track to only take in about 20,000 refugees total in America, which has 320 million people in its population. And according to this article, the goal is to take it down to 15,000 next year, and by 2020, potentially somewhere between 0 and 5,000. So, I mean, you're talking about if Stephen Miller wins, if the sort of Trump administration wins, you could literally have a Japan-style immigration policy here in America with respect to taking refugees, which is, if that's not a white pill on domestic policy, then I'm not sure, what more you could ask for on the immigration question other than the wall. And I will say that given Trump's pride and the fact that he made it in life as a real estate developer, and his thing is building big, gaudy buildings that people want to visit as a cultural institution, I will concede that that the wall has not yet been built, and there has been a totally insufficient amount of resources dedicated to it. But I believe there's sufficient evidence that many of the bones that he's been throwing to the neocons and many of the compromises we've seen as cucking in the past several years have been to win favors so that the wall can substantial progress on it can be made before 2020. And I think that we're on a white pilling track with respect to that.
All right. I will comment just on those last points. So on immigration, the problem is you bring, for example, the number of refugees, 20,000, but that's not all immigration. There is still waves of immigration coming that are not labeled as refugees, that are not labeled as asylum. And the big problem of immigration is not so much the problem of today's immigration. It is the cumulative effect of decades of immigration. And as far as I know, when you look at the analysis, even zero immigration doesn't lead to a save of the white majority in the US unless you invoke some very special circumstances, such as magical moms just showing up and wanting to have babies. Now, as far as the divorce rate, you're talking about a stabilization. All right, so we're not increasing anymore, but we had been increasing for more than 50 years. The graphic here for 1950 to 2010 shows single moms increasing up to 20%, single dads increasing up to 7%. And by the way, this difference between moms and dad How do you obtain this? You obtain this through violations of individual rights in incompetent courts that process hearsay, that do not respect the law. And what we're doing right now in this country is we're telling men, oh, all right, we will respect your right. We won't put you in jail, but we will violate every possible right you have in family courts and will get your children. That's the state of America today. And that's what's illustrated on this graph in this gap. Frame Games, did you have anything to add before the vote?
One last thing, which is just on your first point on noting that
Oh, we lost you.
In terms of the trajectory of our domestic policy, I'm going to send you some links here.
Oh, we lost you again, Frame Games.
Nice. Do my computer freeze?
Yeah,
can you hear
you're
me
back
okay?
now. Yeah.
Sorry. ICE, which enforces our illegal immigration policy, is more menacing and powerful than ever. Under Trump and the current domestic policy that we have from the top down, arrests of undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens with no criminal record have tripled. And according to an Atlantic article that I will link you to here, Trump has radicalized ICE and has basically called for sort of record enforcement of illegal aliens. While we can't enforce the border as much as we'd like to, we have moved in an incredibly white-pilling direction with respect to the power to get rid of illegal immigrants who are already here. I agree we don't have the wall yet. We don't have E-Verify yet. But shy of that, we're doing everything we can. And there is more momentum than there has ever been to get those things in place.
All right. So, chat, if you are white-pilled with Frame Games, type 1. If you are black-pilled with JF, type 2. This is for the question of America's domestic policy. Our initial question was, will America's domestic policies get better or worse from here? It's nice to have these little breaks where we wait for the chat's answers.
It is. I'm a little afraid of the next section. I got to say, I feel pretty good about domestic policy, but the Israel question, I'm pretty scared on this one. But
oh God, it is so tight. Oh my God. Oh my God, we're still splitting that around 50-50.
A lot of twos though.
Yeah. I do see some waves for me. So I don't know if you would agree on that, because I see someone, limited state, using the voting system abusively. He's writing all ones, but I would say that I win this one by a very tight margin.
I think so. Yeah. I think I'll
It's amazing. I think we're going to have to do a straw poll at the end, recapitulating every issue, because the vote is so tight. I'm very afraid that I may be visually influenced. So let's do a straw poll at the end, but it's good to know the reactions of the crowd. And most importantly, I really appreciate that we are two thinkers here, Frame Game, and two friends. At least I consider you a friend, and we are splitting the audience at 50-50, very close to it.
Hey, this feels like a Star Wars. Like I've got the green, you've got the red saber today. I feel like we should have the dramatic music playing during.
I used to have the dramatic music in my beginnings of the public space when I was choosing the co-host. It was like.
I remember that. That was.
It was not so long ago. Because we're at TPS 107, something like that. And so I've done 107 days of TPS because I basically, on average, do one episode per day. All right, foreign policy. And since you started the last two, I will start the next two subjects. And I don't know, we might do a random flip for the fifth subject. So foreign policy. And I will just read two super chats. Grogster says it's okay to be white-pilled, and Cirrus Irina says possible black-white coalition for less immigration. I do believe that, as I said yesterday, I believe, when commenting on the Unite the Right stuff, I do believe that the black population is a very good ally for the alt-right eventually, for white nationalists, but it's really eventually. And it will not be every people in the black population, but there is a nuclei within the black population of people who want a free state, who want to live free. They don't want to be dependent on the government, and they are somewhat libertarian or conservative and identitarian. So there's a natural alliance to be had with some people in the black population eventually.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing to that, which is to say that empirical data now suggests that the black population certainly agrees in majority with respect to restricting illegal immigration. Now, not necessarily on diversity politics in general vis-a-vis the sort of black Hispanic coalition, but in terms of limiting illegal immigration, I've seen recent data suggesting that blacks do agree with whites on that in general.
All right. So foreign policy, the subject we've chosen is, will America, or the West in general, have a glorious future, or will it forever be Israel's bitch? You didn't make it easy for yourself with that phrasing.
I know, I felt...
You have to work on your pre-debating skills, Frame Game. You have to go more dirty.
I thought, to be honest, I felt like I'd framed the first two of them pretty generously for myself. So I kind of wanted to see if I could take this on. But go ahead, hit me with what you got.
All right. So foreign policy. There is no hope for foreign policy, and we will not have a glorious future, and we will forever be Israel's bitch. And the demonstration of that is Trump. Just think in your head, okay, those people who are listening to us in the chat. Think about the future. Do you think there will ever be someone more anti-globalist than Trump, who will win the primary elections in the Republican system, who will talk against the mainstream media in ways that are very suggestive that he's anti-globalist, and then win the election when Trump, a reality TV star, did that with his wealth, with his already acquired base through the links that he had developed within his TV career? Do you really think that someone more anti-globalist will do all of that trajectory again? And will do it, in fact, more than Trump? The answer is that's impossible. Those systems already tried to reject Trump. Trump somehow find himself into a split. He kind of squeezed himself into the Republican Party, but that was a one-shot thing. And the problem is Trump himself, which is the most extreme case we will see for the next 100 years of anti-globalism, even him was not able to really embody an anti-globalist policy for America, at least in terms of the foreign policy. One could argue, oh, he did well or he did okay on immigration. I would let that argument go. But as far as foreign policy goes, as far as military interventions, international diplomacy, we had a very good, he did what he said he would do as far as individualizing the dealings with other countries. But this is largely symbolic. When you look at the military interventions, when you look at the Syria strike, you realize that America has not changed in terms of its submissiveness toward Israel. There was really there was as much reason to strike Syria as there was to make the Iraq war or the Afghan war. And that reason is one reason: Israel, the interest of Israel, and their input within the American democracy, which has been lasting for more than 70 years, which has been continuously controlling American politics, which has been continuously sending the youth of America to be killed for another country. This is the state of the American military since the 1940s. And if there was a hope for this to be changed, it would have been Trump. But reality check, Trump wasn't enough. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'll start this by saying that Trump himself is, I believe, strongly beholden to much of Israeli influence, namely because of the funding that he receives from big Israel donors and the Republican Jewish Congress and whatnot. But there is, okay, on the hold on a second. Okay. Sorry, I'm about to make a very tricky argument, which is this. So Ocasio-Cortez is the future of the left. and as such, there is a undermining of the Jewish place in the left-wing intersectional coalition that may require there to be less. It may result in less international influence than what Israel has, and the requirement to actually play ball. So, a good example of this is the Labour Party, the UK Labour Party, and the fact that Jeremy Corbyn did not fully adopt the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which has been pushed by the Jewish Affinity Network worldwide. And there is a substantial number of a substantial proportion of the left in America, in the UK, in Europe, I'm sure in Canada, that is beginning to be much more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel, and has forced a certain amount of pushback on Jewish power dynamics on the left. And I think that this is going to result in there being less radicalization in Israel. Okay, I actually don't really have much notes on this. The way that I phrase this, I don't know.
I mean, I want to, at this point, I'm so much a lover of the underdog that I'm actually rooting for you to beat me. I'm like, say something, Frank Games.
I had something on this, but the problem is I feel so disingenuous making it based on how I teed up the first two issues.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to attack you on. I was about to say, oh, you dirty guy. Yeah. You are using an argument that can only undermine your first and second points.
I know that right here.
I saw you coming. That's why you were struggling, because you're trying to frame it in a way where it doesn't invalidate your first, but there is no way. I'm telling you in advance.
As long as we don't do a straw poll at the end on the first one, so then I can proceed with this. That's why I said at the end of the last one that I wasn't looking forward to this one. But it is, it's really hard. You kind of do need to pick one. But I will say this, okay? Israel is still bound geographically in terms of how much growth it can really experience and undergo. Not only does America have a lot more room to grow in terms of things that are big becoming bigger, but we have a lot more land. If you look at the amount of unsettled land in America and in Canada, in Australia, in all of the Western countries, there is simply much more real estate. There's much more room for development. You are eternally hidebound and hamstrung in Israel, and it could be the case that they have peaked with respect to the amount of the amount of power that they can generate based on how small they are. And there is now the rise of a new competitive overclass, if you will, and that is the rise of Asia and the Asians. So now the Stuyvesant High School, which is the elite private school, public-private magnet school in New York, used to be dominated by Jews, and it is now 73% Asian. You see the same thing happening in all manner of public schools. All manner of state schools in California because of the passage of Prop 8, which eliminated affirmative action. You see a new Asian overclass. And in fact, for the first time recently, Asian Americans have surpassed Jewish Americans as being the number one medium income household earners. So that's Indians from people with Indian descent and people with East Asian descent have surpassed Jewish, is at least Israeli American median household income. And if you look at Stephen Steinleit's 2001 article on the America's stake in America's changing demographics, the Jewish stake in America's changing demographics, the thing that he appeared to fear most in that article was the rise of a pan-Asian coalition, which could rival that of Jewish influence. And I will note that the Asian populations do not have nearly the kind of I would say coercive lobbying tactics traditionally deployed, and that with them coming to rival the Jewish and Israeli influence on American and Western country lobbying, you could actually see a much more benign, disproportionate overclass vis-a-vis elite Gentiles, and that, I think, represents an existential threat to not only Israeli influence, but many of the aspects of Jewish considerations that we're concerned about when we talk about foreign policy or foreign control of the West. So basically, China will save us. China and Japan.
So Asians overlord, Whitepill you. I guess if you find Asian women more sexy, it's a reconforting thought. But I find this a very weird argument, because we will find ourselves with Asian-based politics. And of course, your argument then relies on, okay, we can hope that Asians will not be as controlling as Jewish people. But to that, I say, the numbers have never been a problem for Jews. The numbers of them in America has always been relatively small, and it's never been a problem to outcompete others. Now, the average household income has never bothered Jewish lobbies. Why? Because Jewish lobbies do not rely on success in their local economies. Jewish lobbies rely on what appears to be an infinite flow of money coming from the financial systems. And so, whether the average Jewish family and the average Asian families make a certain amount of money in their life doesn't really matter for what really controls the game of politics in the US. This game is controlled by huge inputs of money that do not rely on the number of Jews that go in school. They do not rely on the number of Asians that go in school. They rely on a handful of billionaires that want this to be the case. So in my view, this is not a valid argument. Now, to an earlier argument you made, I think it's an important one and an interesting one in terms of comparative analysis of Canada and the US. Because as a Canadian, shouldn't I be white-pilled that I live in a country that often denies participation to the wars that are wanted by Israel? And so in that sense, Canada, amazingly, happens to be a kind of pocket of resistance, of quasi-resistance, because I would say that they sometimes join the efforts of the US in those wars. However, most of the time they don't, and most of the time you get an opposition to the war, and you get Canada refusing to join wars. And this is very tightly linked to the phenomenon you described with Ocasio-Cortez. It's that there is a point on the left, and we see it on far left podcast on YouTube at the Sam Cedar at the Minority Report. There's a point on the left where you are so much to the left that your feelings of care for the Palestinians, they kind of give you a little shame, and they kind of not enable you to participate joyfully to the wars desired by Israel. And Canada is largely in that state. In other words, Canada is a country where Ocasio-Cortez is the mainstream politician. So imagine the mind of Ocasio-Cortez. That is Canada, actually. That's how Canada works. And that's why we are so much on the left that, okay, we would want to help Jewish people in Israel, but we have too much feelings for the oppressed minority that Palestinians are, or that any country being targeted by Israel or the US are. So I would also note that as far as foreign policy goes, the future is not very bright. Because what we're faced with is that we are bound with an ally that funds most of American politics. Most of American politics, and in large part the funding of the Democrat Party, you've described this yourself, Frame Games, is coming from a handful of Jewish billionaires and millionaires. That is a big problem because we are allied with the wrong people. The people who control our politics are the eventual losers of a democratic war and a war of spatial occupation. The Islamic countries are growing in numbers. The demographics there are very healthy. So we find ourselves with a world, the Muslim world, having been underdeveloped in comparison to the US for 100 years. So it's not like they had the technology to compete, but the domination of the US and the resulting domination of Israel over these countries has been largely through an advance in technology. The problem with technologies is that once it stops advancing in the US, because we will bump with the limits of the physical universe. I mean, we can't produce bombs that are more and more efficient and soldiers that are ever more efficient. There is a point at which you made the best bomb and you made the best soldier. Now, the technological gap between the Muslim population and the US will close because it will become easier and easier to copy these technologies. And with a growing population, a growing Muslim population in the world, it will be either war or immigration. And in both cases, we get fucked. Did you have anything to add before the vote?
Well, I would note that there are limits to. I do agree that the Israel-America alliance, in the words of Netanyahu himself, America is Israel's secret weapon. But I do think that there are limits to that we're seeing on display. So, for example, you've got China, which is not only China's investment in Africa is, I think, represents an existential threat to America's influence over America. So if there was, considering the fact that Africa is going to be undergoing this explosive population growth and continuing international investment has led to a relatively unexpected recent rise in growth in places like Nigeria and other economies in Africa. If Israel was much of Israel's influence and power also comes from the ability of Jewish affinity organizations to represent the sort of daddy warbucks for racial minority groups, such as Black and Hispanic groups, that then rely on Jewish groups and vote in favor of them politically. And with this new sort of Chinese class coming underway, I think that there may be a splitting between sort of Jews and Asians with respect to leadership on the left, which will create the same kind of civil war that you have between these different types of white people on the right, and that deconcentrating of power represents potentially an existential threat to left-wing politics radicalizing and being more of a compromise of the two. So that wasn't the most coherent response, but I think that's enough to put it to a vote. I'm not, I think that's about as good as I'm going to do on this one.
All right, so chat, vote for the foreign policy subject. If you are white-pilled with Frame Games, type 1. If you are black-pilled with JF, type 2. And the question, as a reminder, was, will America, or the West in general, have a glorious future, or will it forever be Israel's bitch? I really love this system.
Yeah, this is fine. It would be nice. I wish we could have a real tally on it too, just to.
Yeah, I think we'll finish this with a straw poll because I want to get the exact numbers. So hopefully people stay up to the end and we can get exact numbers. However, the chat being public records, we could also have we could design a bot that considers every vote, that eliminates duplicates.
Hey, what do you need bots for when you have autists?
Oh yeah, we could have autistic monkeys do the calculations for us.
I'm really looking forward to this.
Like I used to have in my laboratory. All right. Well, it does seem that your negative attitude with your own argument has not paid off. In fact, the people did vote for me. It's not clear. It's not like a dominating margin. We're still within some people agreeing with you, but I would guess it's somewhere around 60, 65, whereas the last votes, I think they were around 50 or 55.
I agree. I can see. I think that I think you got this one.
All right. 4. The subject of white people. Will white people continue their glorious history, or will they become demographically extinct or a permanent underclass? And I will change a little bit your wording, Frame Game. A permanent underclass to their multicultural overlords. Or globalist overlords. All right. So white people, will they continue their glorious history? That's the main question I'm answering, because a permanent underclass to their Jewish or globalist overlords or overlords of any other race, I think it's not that much important to me, because I consider that white people as nations will become extinct. And so the question of whether we will be slaves to other people is irrelevant. We will be dead. Will white people continue their glorious history? I mean, I can't believe that you would be standing for a yes to this question. You are the person who came here on the public space explaining that whites are about to become a minority in all of their nations. So I'm willing to entertain the hypothesis that some of these nations would balkanize, or that white people would eventually network and go form a country somewhere. But we're not talking about a glorious future. We're talking about survival. And in that state of survival, the shells that Western civilization will have long been stolen by the multicultural snail, if you will, or the multicultural Bernard Lermit. We are currently replacing our societies and leaving all of their wealth. They will be taken by other people, and whoever chooses within the white race to eventually form an ethno-state somewhere will be faced with the complete abandonment of the ensemble of all structures that were built for hundreds of years by white people. And so what will this subset of the white race look like? Well, first, let's talk about what will happen with Western civilization. So let's talk about a white person that would stay as a minority in a non-white civilization. Well, we've documented this Frame Game in the What's to Come video. Whites, when they become a minority, they are subject to the violence of those people who come in, whoever they are and wherever it happens. Now, the violence will take many forms. I'm not claiming that the remaining white minorities in our civilizations will all get genocided violently. but they will be pushed out. They will be pushed out by minorities who behave differently, who adhere to other standards of behavior in the public sphere or the public space. And so they will either find life so repulsive that they will push themselves out of certain location, and they might form segregated communities elsewhere. But most likely what will happen is worse than this, actually. It's worse than being pushed out physically. And I would argue it's worse than direct violence, because direct violence is something you can respond to. The kind of violence that the white civilization will be exposed to within the next 100 years is the worst form of torture that can be done to someone. It is torture through the state. It is torture through the media. It is torture through a demonization. White people, and this has already started, so I'm not invoking some form of futuristic hypothesis here. This has already started. You can see it in your own life. White people, if you look around you, they are the one minority that it's okay to discriminate against. And this goes within affirmative action schemes, but it also goes in the way we represent white people in the media. It's okay to bash white people today. Just think about how it will be when white people are a minority. We have allowed ourselves to let develop within our society a systematic bullying of white people, and this is not going to change. It's not going to be, I mean, as much as I have hope when I hear Jason Kessler, I want to entertain that hope, but let's be realistic here. We are faced with people who hate us. They hate us, and as I was reading a quote of, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, in the book by Dinesh D'Souza, he was essentially explaining that a multicultural society will be stuck with a big problem. It is that there are legitimate historical claims being made by black people against white people. Black people, they hold these claims in their head. They say, well, there were decades of slavery of my ancestor, or even centuries of slavery of my ancestor by this people. And there is a fear on the other side of whites saying, well, I don't want to live in a high crime society, and I don't want to live in a society that is so homogeneous where my people will become a minority. Now, those are all the ingredients as was described by the very founding fathers of America and the great presidents who came after them. This is the recipe for a civil war. So there may be in certain parts of Western civilization, white people being confronted with direct violence, as we've seen in Sweden today, but as we've seen in France for 20 years. For 20 years in France, the observation of a Muslim gang with AK-47s shooting at people and shooting at police, putting cars in fires, has been a regular view. It is something that French people have come to accept. So this is a telling of the future for many places in Western civilization. Direct physical violence by minorities who have. It's not even the problem of integration. It's the problem of biology. It's the problem. We're taking people who come from areas that have been at war and that have been in reproductive races for hundreds of years. What do you think will happen if you put them in a place where essentially the entire population has been exposed to an internal criminal justice system that puts people systematically in jail? Well, you have a genetic difference here. You have people who differ at the base. It's not a problem of integration. And yet we have committed to immigration laws that would be such that, yes, these people enter our countries, they differ from us, and there is no proof that they will integrate. In fact, there is no proof that integration itself is the solution. So talking about implementing that solution is like a second step. We should first be asking, is it a solution at all? I believe it is not. That's direct physical violence. But what worries me most is what happens in Canada. It's the state of torture that just white heterosexual men find themselves in a country that is growing against them, a country that hates them, and a country that justifies their bullying in mainstream media and state-sponsored media. And I'm not even talking here about the big problems that relate to family courts, because we've already covered it. But there is an attack against white families, and it's not just from the outside and not just directed at men. We have developed state solutions that have been developed not surprisingly by the left. And who votes for the left? Well, it is the minorities we bring in our countries. Minorities of our countries and women have teamed up to design state systems that are aimed at destroying the white family. And there is not a single political project on this entire planet to stop this, to change family courts, to change the way child protective services violate the rights of individual white men and destroy families. We have state systems that are essentially designed to whisper to the ear of the white woman, are you sure you're not abused? Are you sure you want to keep living with him? Because we have a state solution for you. And that's how we destroy white families. That's why the birth rate is reduced. That's why there are so many MGTOWs. I don't know if that's the correct way to say it, but men gone their own way. It's because the sexual market has become so unattractive that there are people choosing to be evolutionary dead ends. And big surprise, who chooses that most? The white race, white people. Not a surprising thing when we justify so much of their bullying in our world. Frame Games, what do you have to say?
All right. So the question isn't, are things good or bad right now? It's, are you white-pilled or black-pilled for the future? And in particular, are we experienced something really in the past year and a half, 2 years, 2.5 years, that represents a changing of the trend lines that we've been moving towards, and in fact have started to right the ship? So with respect to the welfare of white people, while it's true that I've covered all of the statistics and reasons for why, if the trends that were in place continued, things would be blackpilling, there are in fact a very large number of white-pilling facts that I'm going to just cover now. So one is European ethnic awareness is at record high levels. 55% of white Americans said, according to a recent survey nationwide, that they felt systematically discriminated against. This is the founding block of coalition politics and beginning to vote en masse to represent yourself demographically, as the blackpilling voting patterns that we see with respect to different identity groups really is only a problem in the context of, one, becoming a minority, and two, being split amongst yourself while everybody else block votes. So what the data that I cited earlier about left-wing white millennials becoming right-wingers is an example of a white-pilling trend line for people to actually be to finally end that civil war that has been a part of white America for so long. Now, you also have a record low confidence in media. You know, one of the things that we talked about earlier with respect to the Trump phenomenon, which sort of ties into the sort of white people aspect here, is that, you know, you argued that the Trump phenomenon is not repeatable because of the special circumstances around Hillary Clinton and kind of getting lucky here. We're not going to have something fall into our lap with someone quite so bad, you know, next time around, or the events, the weird things, her passing out and other things. But we now have a generation of Americans who are permanently inoculated against mainstream media. So, and this is what recent polling data does suggest, is that the confidence in media is at an all-time low. Europeans do have an ethnic awareness at all-time highs. And not only that, you see white Americans moving into power centers that they were previously displaced from. So here's a really interesting statistic that we haven't talked about yet, which might merit its own show, which is that cities are becoming white again. So here is an interesting a statistic on this. Among the 50 largest cities in the U.S., nearly half gained a statistically significant number of whites from 2010 to 2014, and this is based on a 2015 article. And only 5 cities of the top 50 lost in their white population. That's compared to 35 cities where the white population shrank in the 2000s and 31 in the 1990s. You see this everywhere. Gentrification is happening in Chicago. It's happening in Baltimore. It's happening in New York. And it's even happening in Detroit. There is now a lot of this is because of the Section 8 housing policy that has essentially paid poor Black families to move to the suburbs. That was the whole Ferguson phenomenon of previously white suburbs being inundated. But what you see now is that these power centers, these major high population power centers that gave rise to such destructive state governments and really leaked its way up to the federal level, now you're beginning to see city councils and major cities having white mayors again, having white city politics. And since they are the power hubs, you could, even if there is a demographic decline, you would see a kind of Jewish phenomenon of having disproportionate control over major cultural institutions. Now, when you combine that with the fact that very recent data, and that's coming out of May 2018, which is not the data that was extrapolated from in many of the demographic trend line studies that I've cited over the past couple of years. There does appear to be a diminishing of the minority female birth rate that is beginning to look a little bit more like the white birth rate. And I'll show you a link here that, hold on a second. Hold on. Here we go. And this is from just this May, and it's got some useful charts here, which shows a unexpected baby bust among minority women. So if you combine the approximation of Hispanic birth rates with white birth rates, that is, if these trends continue, now if they just stabilize where they are, that might be blackpilling, but never before have we seen Hispanic birth rates falling at like 18 points, which is double that of whites. Now, of course, that's because whites are already have low birth rates, but you're beginning to see Hispanic birth rates approximate that. And if we have the continuation of a pro-natalist immigration policy, you could begin to see, if these trends continue or go exponential, you could actually see a stabilization of demographic trends. So unclear whether or not this is going to how far this is going to extrapolate outwards. All of the historical demographic projection data doesn't take this into account because this is really based on, data from just this year. But this is new, and this is whitepilling, and this is something that could represent a stabilization of the demographic situation. And the last time white people had effective control over cities was in the 1950s. Okay, like we talked about, like what happened to Washington. And Washington is, it had like a black mayor for 60 years, right? Same with most major cities. Well, white mayors are becoming a thing again. So, these are white pills all across the board that you couldn't have even imagined a couple of years ago because of the way trend lines used to be, and are becoming immensely white pilling. You're now starting to see legislation that could actually reverse all of this significantly, as they did in Israel, as they did in Hungary, and in Russia. All three of those countries instituted top-down legislation such as child tax credits, block grants for families that in their first 2 or 3 years of child raising. Activists are now starting to push for a child tax credit that could actually have a similar effect as it did in Russia, Israel, and Hungary. And when you combine that with similar legislation that's being proposed now in Poland, and Poland, which is beginning to become a powerhouse in Europe, it has a 5% GDP growth, double that of of their EU neighbors. It has now become completely modernized. They just held a concert there. It was a rock concert with U2 and Goo Goo Dolls and whatnot. They had 800,000 people go to Poland for that one thing alone. Poland is becoming autonomous as well. I mean, they floated legislation that basically said that it was a crime to say that Poland was responsible for anything related to the Holocaust. There is a Law and Justice Party in place now that is, they are essentially just like Hungary with respect to their immigration policy, extremely woke on all these issues, and 99% white. And you're beginning to see a resurgence. Italy, which had demographic projections from our show of being a white minority in 2050 or 60, has since that show had an incredibly populist president take power, and they vowed to boot 500,000 African immigrants. So all of these things represent a reversal of the trend line. And the question is, how far forward will it be extrapolated? But it is certainly a white-pilling series of events that we've seen just this year.
All right. So as far as the Hispanics birth rate goes, I'm aware of this data. And that's always why when I talk about the extinction of the white race, I'm kind of on the fence as far as the U.S. goes, because the U.S. seems to have a momentum on its religious white Christian families. They have a good birth rate, and there are some drops like the one you mentioned, which are encouraging. So I'm not saying that the situation is totally dark for the US, but I would point out first that everywhere else in the world, in Western civilization, Canada, France, Sweden, it looks very bad, and there is no such hope. Now, there is a small hope for the American white people, but the question was, will white people continue their glorious history? And to me, everything that you present looks like a kind of, it won't be that bad, or it won't be terrible, and it won't be genocidal, and maybe will be a huge minority in America. But largely, to me, the dice are already thrown, and we're not talking about a glorious future for the white race. Anything to add before we go to the vote?
I guess one more thing is that even if you're talking about the demographic situation, like, for example, in South Africa, it is worth noting that, South Africa, even though whites are 9% of the population, and we do see these farm murders that are happening that are awful and genocidal, whites still own 79% of the land. And so even if you are, say, blackpilled on the fate of poor whites and what's happening to them, you could still see a perpetuation of wealthy whites, even in the worst case scenario, as you see in Brazil, as you see in South Africa, and many other such places. So even in a black pill scenario, you would still expect to see significant perpetuation of white success in countries where even in the worst case scenario where they become a minority.
All right, time for the vote, chat. So if you are white-pilled with Frame Games, type 1. If you are black-pilled with JF, type 2. And the question, I will remind the question, it was white people. Will white people continue their glorious history, or will they become demographically extinct or a permanent underclass to their multicultural overlords? Type 1 for Frame Games and the Whitepill. Type 2 for JF and the Blackpill.
Oh my dude, this is an even split, right?
This is 50-50 for real.
A couple of twos came in. All right, some ones.
All right.
Twos are stuck.
But since it's 1 versus 2, since I attributed 2 wins to me and 1 to you, I will use my kind of visual discretion to say you kind of won by 1 vote. And so we are 2 versus 2, and we are entering our 5th subject. Yeah, and there was a wave of ones at the end, Era. And there's lots of people voting 1.5 or 3. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. All right. It's somewhere between a draw and, well, we'll see. Okay. If you're willing to.
I'm giving it to you, and we are 2 versus 2, entering our 5th subject. Let's take a break. I'll be back in 20 seconds. Then I'll read the super chats that we had. We had lots of super chat. And then we start the 5th subject.
Just give me 1 sec while you're reading the super chats. I'll be on mute.
All right, I will be back in 20 seconds. All right, we are back.
Hey, can you hear me on the sound? Just doing a mic check.
We can hear you.
Awesome.
All good.
All right.
I'm reading the super chats.
All right.
So Juvenescence sends $5. He says Israel will always tell the US, bend over, bitch, and the US will always ask, how much lube? G.I. Jack sends $10. Thank you so much. He says, love your work, guys. I hope you don't mind if I ask any alt-right types or just those who are curious to check out my work. I just started on YouTube and wanted to spread the word. Wish me luck. All right, people, it's G.I. Jack. Just type it on Google and you will find his YouTube channel. Commissar sends $10. He says, after this debate, search The Evil Among Us by Dr. Pierce to hear snippets from the Jerusalem Post for red pills on the white slave trade. Do not race mix. Don't take... Okay, I will not read the rest. Commissar says, watch, okay, I will not read this one, but thank you for the super chat. And he asked, screenshot this super chat. Well, Commissar, both your nickname and your super chats are hate speech, and so I'm gonna have to actually delete this particular post. I'm sorry, I can't, but thank you for the donation. G.I. Jack says, plus 5 shekels for your nice moderators. Indeed, I believe that we have the best team of moderators on all of YouTube. They are absolutely wonderful and they are welcoming to our viewers, and I really enjoy what they do. I can't be thankful enough for everything they did for this channel. Commissar sends $10. He says, Well, you use the word destroy, and man, you have to change your phrasing, dude, if you want me to read, because I actually have to remove it when I see it. So learn to phrase stuff in a non-violent fashion. G.I. Jack says, Blackpill is racism. It's pill of color. All right, it was a joke, I believe. Joseph McAvoy sends $10. He says, Frame Games and JF, nothing better on the YouTubes. Yeah, I'm very glad about the product that we do here. Commissar says, watch, well, all right, well, okay, Commissar, I mean, thank you so much for your donations, but I can't read these things. He also sends another $10. He says, democracy is the preferred system because it puts the political power into the hands of the media and allows them to evade responsibility. A quote of Dr. Pierce in the video. All right. Well, thank you for your donations. There are some removals of your last super chats that I have to do. I'm sorry. Son of Sparda says, Russia is the future. Don't be such a baby, JF. I'm not a baby. Son of Sparda says, JF, get a Russian woman. Nah. I'm okay with my woman. Commissar sends $2. Thank you so much. And Mr. Fahrenheit sends $20. He says, I know it's based upon nothing but a purely idealized perception, but I just can't vote against the white man. We can jump into a plane and do a barrel roll. All right, so he's essentially saying that he is hopeful, although he understands the situation in front of him is very tough. And Matt Clem sends $30. Thank you so much. And he says, make men men again. I really love this statement. All right, Frame Games, any comments on what we read before we move to our fifth subject?
Symmetry of that last super chat. Make men men again. It's I really like that. So yeah, I guess on the last one here, the tiebreaker. It's do you want to lead off, or you want me to, or how should we do this?
However you feel. I'm up for you leading off if you'd like.
So I see so this next one. Do you want to read, I guess, for the chat with the way it was teed up?
So the theme is future technologies' impact on mankind. Will the parade of future technology in the fields of biology, AI, and elsewhere be good for mankind, or will it destroy us?
Okay. So there is a confluence of technologies that are in their early stages right now, and when they have achieved maturity, it is going to totally change the human experience in a number of critical ways. And maybe we'll stick to like two for right now. So one of them is biological changes, such as genetic engineering, stem cell therapy, and any number of pharmacological or pharmaceutical or therapeutic changes to the human neuroendocrine system or the human life cycle system that will change the human experience. And the other one is artificial intelligence and machine learning and other kinds of mechanical, robots, drones, all of the sort of mechanical changes to the world. So really, there is this question of won't there be a biomechanical overlord? Is it something that is going to be, is it going to lead us, or is it going to be sort of a horse that we will ride? And I sort of categorize this under what someone on a stream I recently did called national futurism, which I think is a wonderful sort of theme for embracing the future while being, proud of your identity and supporting nationalist causes and whatnot. And I think that these changes are manifestly good, although I will admit that there are aspects of them that are risky and give reasonable grounds for black pills. On net, I think that the reasonable position at this point forward is to be white pilled on them for the following reasons. One, with respect to identity issues, the closer we get to being able to change biological immutable characteristics, such as those related to your neuroendocrine system, like testosterone, and potentially even sort of racial phenotypic characteristics, the less race becomes a immutable characteristic, and the more the less protected it becomes, and the less core a part of one's identity it is forced to be. And if you are operating in a world built on diversity politics, then that can only mean, if adopted, a diminution in the power of the diversity industry. So, for example, I think about testosterone and things like testosterone replacement therapy, which now allows, really for the first time ever in the history of biological organisms, a late stage biological organism to have, or mammal, to have testosterone levels identical to what it had when it was in adolescence. So you can take testosterone therapy now in your 60s and have the T levels of somebody in their 20s. That, now, of course, there is a lot of spice to that at the moment because it's in its early stages, but it is now therapeutic at the level where anybody can get it. And as these kinds of therapies, as stem cell therapy, such as the kind that Mel Gibson's dad had, these kinds of things actually change a lot of the baseline characteristics of racial groups. For example, as you know, and many people who are aware of the data on racial literature know, there is an average baseline difference in biological testosterone levels between Asians, Caucasians, Hispanics, and Africans. And that was previously immutable. It is now changeable. As more and more things become changeable, you will begin to see a diminution in the super importance of identity, and in along that vein, you will see more safe harbors for it being okay to be white because life is what you make it. Now, with respect to artificial intelligence, I think that represents another huge step forward for a number of reasons. One, if we do nothing and we're limited to our current state, we're all going to die anyway because the sun is going to go cold. We're the baseline like temperature of the universe is going to get less and less. But we are now at a point because of technology where if a small asteroid were to come towards Earth and we had enough advanced notice, we could send a missile into space and potentially save the globe. Avert what happened to the dinosaurs. Imagine what kind of things will be possible with respect to artificial intelligence. And it doesn't need to supplant humanity in any way. It could actually be that we simply merge in a way that super enhances our experience and makes us more human. So along the lines of things being more human, I imagine the world of our grandchildren as being one where technology actually makes the natural human experience exposed for the limitations that it has. And a few analogies just quickly. So one, think about planes. We have the ability to fly planes, and we don't have any sort of human, species pride in being able to outfly planes or outrun cars. But because we have access and use that technology, we look at Amish people as being almost a different species, because we are a species that can utilize planes and cars and electricity, and they are effectively a species that can't. And it's a completely natural experience for us to evolve along with this technology. And with respect to, if you think about contact lenses, or LASIK surgery, these things make the world appear more realistic than it would appear without it. If you did not have LASIK surgery to give you superhuman vision, you would not be able to pick up on the resolution of the world the way it really is. So I don't see the national futurism and all the technologies associated with tomorrow as being a diminution of the human experience or something to wipe us out, other than the singularity event with AI, which we can talk about. But rather, I see it as a radical enhancing of our ability to interact with the world and giving us all potentially superpowers that makes the experience more human than ever.
Ladies and gentlemen, I start my last case. What we are faced with here is exactly the root of what will lead to our destruction. This curiosity. What?
I'm sorry. I'm going.
Okay.
This is scary.
So humanity will end within the next million years. And this bi-frame game is just one more step into getting us to destroy ourselves. I'm going to just lay out what will happen for the next million year on Earth, and it will happen no matter what you do. And this is what will happen to the human race, no matter if you oppose to it, no matter if you spread the word, if you try to convince one people, convince two people. This is a set of consequences that humanity is about to deploy within the next few decades, and that are motivated exactly by the kind of narrative that frame games just did, which will result in the complete extinction of all DNA-based life on Earth and its replacement by a mechanical alternative, a computer-based alternative. Frame Games is right in one thing. It is not singularity. It is not a super intelligent AI that will replace us. It is a form of AI, but one that modifies human genetics, which will eventually start farming human puppets to interact with the world and to do its bidding, and eventually the ensemble of our body will be modified, poked, stroked, replugged in various wicked ways so as to serve this artificial intelligence. Our bodies will be recycled by the life form that we're about to create within the next few decades in humanity, inevitably. So how will it happen? Well, it starts with people like Frame Games. Oh, there are opportunities. Why don't we modify some genes? Why don't we change some hormonal pathways in the human body? It will only make them better. Of course, it will make them better. Of course, people will go to clinics, and we already have the technology. We have CRISPR. We just are waiting for a few years before it is applied on a single human baby, and that single human baby will be the end of humanity. People will get to clinics, improve their babies. Oh, how about removing Alzheimer's? No one would want their baby to have Alzheimer's. How about we remove Parkinson's disease? How about we give them blue eyes? How about we make them more intelligent? And eventually, every human on Earth will find themselves inevitably going to a clinic to modify their genes before they produce their babies. It's just going to be better. And the natural humans may survive for a few generations, but faced with the inevitable superiority of this system, they will be outcompeted and replaced. And at that moment, humanity will have engaged in a cycle of reproduction with a machine, and there will be no way out of this cycle. Everyone will want it. It will be better for everyone, and everyone who didn't want it will have been wiped out of the surface of this earth by then. Reproduction in the form of a sperm and an egg without a computer will have disappeared from the planet Earth in human civilization within the next few tens of thousands of years, completely wiped out. Now, at this point, there will be recommendations being produced by computers to produce better and better humans. However, there will also be a sort of competition on Earth that we've never seen before, a competition between computers. Some clinics will do better than others. Some will just have mastered the science of genes and phenotypes in better ways, and eventually these clinics will outcompete other clinics. Some computers will do better at creating these human beings. Some computer will have found the optimal solution for human production. And that computer will eventually beat up the other computers. People will be ready to pay for this clinic more. People will be more interested in reproducing in this clinic instead of this other clinic. And at this point, there will be a competitive process, an evolutionary process, applying not on humans, but on clinics. Until one day, one of the clinics will start producing lesser human from the perspective of humans. They will have no ego. They will have no love. All they will feel is this desire to reproduce their computer, reproduce their clinic. There will be a time at which a computer will find a human solution that essentially, to our view, will be a human puppet. To our view, this human will be completely uninteresting. But for the computer, it will do a service that intelligent and egotistical and loving humans would not be able to do. They will be a better machine to reproduce machines. They will be a better human puppet for the artificial intelligence that will decide their genes. And by then, humans will have stopped evolving for themselves. They will be evolving for producing clinics that create more human puppets to serve more of the reproduction of the bits of data on this hard drive. And at some point, there will eventually be sycophantic humans who will be sycophantic enough that they will not even care about introducing their own genes in the genetic descent that they will produce. They will straight out copy the bits on the hard drive of this clinic. They will be completely submitted to it. There will be more and more clinics copying themselves rather than copying humans. And at this point, humans will have become an accessory in the reproductive cycle of a machine. This starts within the next few decades, and it's unstoppable. What do you have to say, Frame Games?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'm just processing it.
And just to describe well what I've just described, this already happened 4 billion years ago. 4 billion years ago, there was a life form called RNA, an RNA life form that was not using DNA to transmit its genes. And it started using DNA, and it got fucked by DNA. And we're the descendants of the genocidal DNA strand that has fucked its ancestor the same way a computer is about to fuck us.
Okay, so I honestly just think that those last 3 minutes, that exposition you just did right there it needs to be clipped for history, because that was just such a deadpan, just such a clear, logical exposition in deadpan on how robots are going to, not robots, I mean, on exactly the analogy that you just said. But can you break that down for me a little bit? So you said that the DNA, did to what computers are going to do to us are what DNA did to RNA. But RNA still plays a pretty big role in the whole, in the whole process of cell protein production and all that, right? So, I mean, it's not gone, is it?
Absolutely. But if you looked at the RNA life form that was there 4 billion years ago, and you look at what RNA does in our body, you would conclude one thing. RNA was once free. RNA was once working for its own interest, but it trusted something else. And it started serving that thing, serving DNA. And so today, you see what's being done to RNA in our bodies. It's essentially being surgically split and reconnected in all sorts of wicked ways. And this is what will happen to humans. Of course, there will be a kind of human-like creature serving the technological overlord. But that human creature will be so unrecognizable that you wouldn't call it human. you wouldn't call it humans because they will not be seeking to defend their own interest. They will not be reproductive units. They will be loosely based on the human form, but they will have been selected for their ability to serve a hard drive.
Yeah, well, I guess, we all got to serve someone. There is that line from Moby Dick, the universal thumb gets passed around. I guess as I see it, we are currently already machines. I mean, under the selfish gene, Richard Dawkins' conception of things, right? If we are just replication machines, then, being a robot or being a computer or serving a computer is not really all that different than serving DNA, for DNA replication purposes. And so really, I guess part of it comes down to is, are you okay with being subsumed into something greater than yourself? If you believe that these, if this sort of class that is more evolved than you is capable of doing more good, I guess, however you define it. I mean, as I see it, the human state is extremely limited as is, and is not long for this universe if it does not continue to evolve at greater and greater levels of ability and sophistication, right? I mean, there's not any evidence that I've seen of there being other planets within our solar system capable of hosting life. We are already, at a very fine distance between being too close to the sun and too far away from the sun. There is so much fragility in the human condition, and so much of what could be out there for us to grow and expand and do is limited by the human form not having powers that could potentially be jockeyed with respect to or jockeyed with respect to these kinds of like computer evolution. So can I ask and just poke around at the theory that you articulated there? Mm-hmm. Is there what would you and again, I guess this is part of like the 1-2 debate thing, but I also, what you've said is just genuinely very interesting and curious, and I just would like to hear from a biological perspective, like, what do you see as the strongest counter argument to, or like spin-off of that not happening? Because I was sort of going in a different direction with respect to like the technology, but I think that this is, I mean, do you see any potential? Is it an inevitability to you, or is it a probabilistic model where something else might, like, does it have to result in this sort of DNA, RNA parallel?
I mean, the way I see it is theoretically it's possible, but here's what you would need to stop it. You would need laws being passed in every single country on Earth that ban genetic modification of babies. Then you will need to ensure to apply these laws to every single individual, because if just one individual modifies the genes of their babies in a way that improves them, he will get more numerous and he will represent a higher population in the next generation. And these babies will also want to modify genetically their babies. So if you let this happen to a single individual on planet Earth, we're done. We are on a course which in the tens of thousands of years that follow will result in a complete dominance.
Okay, so let me ask this. Would you be okay with this if it did not result in the sort of machine element? Like, for example, if you had this sort of runaway evolutionary arms race, like vis-a-vis genetic engineering, but it was limited to greater and greater levels of biological supremacy, you might say. That is, people living longer, being physically stronger, being able to breathe underwater, or or things like that. But it didn't involve, literal machine, mechanical overlords. Is there a way that
I've been thinking this through, and it's my problem is not with the fact that our overlords will be mechanical. In fact, they could be virtual in some way. They could be molecular in some way. And I wouldn't care. I would still find this a dramatic outcome for humanity. The problem of a phenotypic revolution is that you cannot escape it in the way you propose, because no matter how you use your phenotype to modify your genes, it will create a phenotypic revolution. There is no way out. At some point in your recommendations that you will do for people to be able to breathe underwater or whatever, this system of recommendation will be implemented in your phenotype. And so no matter what's the media you use for generating the recommendations, that media will become your farmer. No matter what it is, biological, mechanical, virtual. In fact, the last phenotypic revolution 4 billion years ago was a molecule taking over another molecule by printing fake versions of it. DNA started printing fake versions of RNA, and it won. And so there's no way you can win even by changing the media to something else. The big problem is that, and you mentioned it in your introduction to that part, you said, well, aren't we machine? Aren't we already slave to our genes? Yes, we are. But we are slave to genes that are contained in us. And so our own bodies are designed to favor the survivability of our genes. And so that's why we have ego. That's why we have love. That's why we have all of the feelings that we have. And that's why animals will flee danger. It's because they carry their genes. And so their machines are optimized for themselves. Once you start getting your genes printed or recommended by any external entity, you become an animal farm. You become a farm animal. You become a life form that evolves to serve the printer rather than yourself. And the problem of any recommendation on genes, any cultural intervention on genes, any form of printing of genes of any kind is that the printer takes over all the time.
Are there any counterexamples of the printer not taking it? Like, because I could see some permutations where, the printer gains influence, but then there's a check on it. Like there's sort of a evolutionary arms race between, the initial proprietor and then the printer of it. Does it always end in a victory for the printer?
It doesn't necessarily, and the problem is, it doesn't in certain circumstances, and here are the circumstances. When you trust an external printer that is less good at encoding genes than yourself, it won't lead to a phenotypic revolution. When you are dealing with a printer that has a higher mutation rate than yourself, it won't become a printer. When the printer is not able to print at a high enough resolution your genome, so it loses information, it doesn't work. But the problem is, if humans start modifying their genes, it's because it's gonna be better. It's because the media that they're gonna have found or the recommendations that they will have found will have an evolutionary advantage. That's why it's a never stopping, it's an inevitable outcome. It's because once humans will benefit from it, it will mean that this media is indeed superior. And the process of the phenotypic revolution will already have been started.
Dainty Brighton in the chat says, #not all printers. Well, I'm really looking forward to the book, because there's a lot here that I would like to be able to explore in depth, because that is, if true, I guess, what's the line? Huge if true.
It is unfortunately true, and I'm the discoverer of this theory, the theory of the phenotypic revolution. When I discovered this, I must have been 22 years old, and or maybe even before. I'm 34 now. It must have been 7 years ago, so I must have been 26 or something like that. And I really found out about this. I discovered the process when I started thinking about DNA and how DNA emerged. And I left academia because I knew that I would never come up with an idea that's as radical as this and that will change biology forever.
Okay, all right. Let me just make one appeal before we put it to the vote here. Just recognize, chat, if you vote 2 on this, even if this guy's right, there's going to be no meaning in your life ever, all right? So
All right, I will do my own appeal. Ladies and gentlemen of the chat, vote 2 so that the mechanical overlord that will replace us will know that there was a bunch of humans who met on August 13th who knew that it was going to happen. So that at least this mechanical overlord learns something about it. He learns that he inherited the earth from us, that he fucked us, and that if he cares about his own existence, this thing, this machine, then it should never do what we're about to do. It should never trust an external entity to encode and print its own genes. Vote 1 if you are white-pilled with frame games, and vote 2 if you are black-pilled with JF. Future technology's impact on mankind. Will the parade of future technology in the fields of biology, AI, and elsewhere be good for mankind, or will it destroy us?
oh my God.
Did I punch you at the end?
No, it was a good try, though. Man, wow. I have to say there are some great clips. I think here there were a few like speeches. You know, have you ever seen the movie Cloverfield?
No,
it's about,
I don't know about it.
Godzilla monster or whatever that like it takes over the world. It just like destroys everything. And you're following around the whole movie. You're following this girl around, and at the very end, like the last thing you see, like as the monster is like destroying everything, like he's about to step on something at the end, and it's like the last thing he crushes is like a video camera, and that video camera has it rolls tape, and it's like a picture of her as a child. And she's like talking about like the way the world is going to be. And I just imagined your speech at the end there. It's like you're saving it for, like you're trying to preserve this in history so that this tape is like the last thing that gets overwritten by our biomechanical overlords. But
all right, man. So I think the votes are in. I totally won this one.
That was well done. All right, GG. That was a
all right, so the final score, as far as the vote of the chat goes, seems to be like 3-2, but it was so tight on everything except the end. I totally blasted you on the end. However, right now, I call everyone on the chat to go to that straw poll link and vote for each of the subjects. I've put up the 5 subjects, and you can vote JF1 on Trump or Frame Games 1 on Trump, JF1 on America's domestic policy, or Frame Game 1 on America's domestic policy. Every subject is there. Choose one winner for each of them so we get full counts.
I love it, man. You know what? I got to read your book so that I'm ready for that argument next time. When is the book coming out?
Well, actually, the book is fully written, and it's in the end of the last editing round of reviews, so I'm paying someone to review it, so it could go out very soon. At least a month or 2 before it comes back to me, I suspect, and we're really talking about the last round of review.
Very cool.
All right, maybe while we wait, I could actually read the last the last chapter of the book, maybe not the whole chapter, but just a small segment to give you an idea while we wait for the results to be in.
Good.
The last chapter is called The End of DNA, and it's not end, END, it's just ND. because I develop a new word in this book. It's ending, which means adding a phenotypic revolution in your series of phenotypic revolution. Because not only did these phenotypic revolutions occur 4 billion years ago for DNA, but RNA itself had been revolting in a phenotypic revolution. Maybe a few 100 million years before, it had been revolting against proteins. And so, I don't know which part I would choose to give you an idea. Let's see. Oh yeah, I can describe the last human on Earth and how he feels. Let's see. There's somewhere where I write about the last human. All right. From the inception of direct quantum replication, mobility became a tremendous asset. So we're talking about a part of the chapter where I've described all of the theory that I described to you, and we're really at the end of it. So I say, over time, some quantomes, and the quantomes are the reproductive computers, they evolved much more efficient migration strategies. Some were carried by humans, like ancient royalty born on litters, though most quantomes were satisfied with being transported in a backpack. Others traveled digitally using the remnants of the internet. Quantomes were no longer bound to clinics. They were pieces of information roving the world in the search of human puppets to further their advancement. In parallel, some descendants of the original quantum invented better machines to serve their replication. Some had mutated various replacements for the human machines, revised biological organisms, based loosely on the human form, but poked, distorted, and changed in every dimension. The various Frankensteinish creations of these mutated quantomes occupied the majority of Earth's niches, which had formerly been occupied by microscopic bacteria, fish, birds, and mammals. Most quantomes found humans to be a useless accessory. There were far more efficient machines to employ in replication. Cities filled with humans had always been tremendously expensive, and wiping humans out would eventually become an ecological necessity. Human DNA was dominated by a new life form that was storing and rewriting its genes digitally. Everything had been set in motion by a single mistake, a single letter of DNA that urged a loyal employee to foist its quantum upon the globe. This single mutation of a single letter of DNA was enough to turn human teams into cream. This dramatic revolution happened gradually, and without the guidance of any conscious being. By the time humans were excluded from the life cycle of the quantum, they had already been stripped of most of their consciousness. Toward the end, their thoughts consisted only of an overwhelming desire to help their quantum replicate. Humanity did not end in a nuclear bang or ecological collapse. No one sobbed inconsolably upon realizing that it was all over. No one was faced with the dilemma of cannibalizing their kin. The last human on Earth died in the delirious bliss of knowing that his death would improve the efficiency of his quantum, the only significant matter in the universe, at least from his perspective. If you are anxious about the future, please rest assured that the phenotypic revolution that destroyed all of us was the most painless demise experienced by any life form. All phenotypic machines die a meaningful death when they do so in service to their revolutionary phenotype. The last act of humanity was uncharacteristically altruistic for our species, as we graciously let go of our own existence so that something else could live.
Wow. Yeah, man. So can I ask you something?
Yep.
Because I really want to understand the DNA RNA history a little bit better. I seem to remember hearing that like a long time ago, and I'm just not fluent enough to be able to talk at a high level with you about that. But how do you move forward, holding this belief and, with articulating it at this level, being able to kind of see step by step into the future so that its clarity is crystal. How do you like go about your day-to-day life? Like, what is the, this is a weird question, but like, what is the meaning of life to you? If because
if
I mean,
you
I
are
can
that
see,
black-pilled.
like, how do you move forward on this? Is it, don't you have to have like that beating heart of humanity? Because you have children and you're and passionately so. I mean, what motivates you if this is what you believe is going to happen?
I actually answered that in the very last paragraph of the book. And so I'm speaking in the name of the DNA strand. So I'm saying, let's imagine that the DNA strand that produced the revolutionary phenotype that made the error of starting the clinics, let's assume it has feelings. But really, the reality is that this is me speaking. And I quote myself saying, I am sorry for what I stumbled upon. I deeply regret on losing this cataclysmic machine, but it's too late now. I exist in millions of humans worldwide, an expanding front propelling the revolutionary phenotype into dominance. As I look at myself and what I've done, I'm unsure of who I am. Somehow in the graceful tango between me and this technological creation, which ensures I will be leaving something into the future generations, I cannot see where my gene ends and the machine begins. Perhaps after all there are no revolutionary phenotypes. Perhaps there are only selfish genes whom, lost in the maniacal pursuit of their own interest, end up conceiving novel and terrifying varieties of genes. I wish I could go back, but I've lost my way in the midst of this replicator tango, and it's always easier to finish a dance than to dance backward to its start. Do I have the moral authority of choosing between which is best, between the technological creation and DNA? Well, it doesn't really matter. I know which side I'm on. On the one hand, every revolutionary phenotype can have a shot at its own existence. On the other hand, no native life form is forced to go down without a fight. And I know a few tricks that this machine won't expect. It's every gene for itself. May the best replicator win. Good luck, Quantoms. And so I say, no native replicator is forced to go down without a fight. And that's essentially my attitude. And it comes from a very deep philosophical training that I had on Albert Camus. In The Myth of Sisyph, which is a book where he says, okay, I discovered the absurdity of life. Is it worth for me to continue life now that I admit that life is absurd? Or should I just commit suicide? And Albert Camus was not aware of course, biological theory or the revolutionary phenotype, even less. He wrote his philosophy decades before I discovered that process, but he had felt that the existence was absurd. And he had asked himself, with that feeling, should I commit suicide? And he had come with an answer, which is, what he proposes is a philosophy of revolt. The philosophy of revolt is, okay, the world is absurd and my existence in it is absurd, but I will essentially troll the universe by continuing to exist, by refusing to commit suicide. Instead of letting yourself be turned down by the absurdity of the universe, he says, maintain that absurdity and live as a kind of witness of that absurdity and maintain it in the physical world by refusing to removing yourself.
I like it, man. This is always an education.
All right. So let's read some of the last super chats. Oh my God, we received a lot. Thank you so much, people. Frederick White says, by 2030, there will be more people of color than whites. Son of Sparda says, just because people of color will outnumber whites, this doesn't mean Eastern Europe or Russia will ever open their borders. I agree with that Commissar sends $20. He says, unfortunately, 2 on all counts. JF is right. Whites are too brainwashed by the mass media and the vulgar superstition of egalitarianism. Love your work, JF. I know you can't read most of what I say. Son of Sparta says, Russia still has more nukes than any other country. Africa will never threaten them. He also says, Italy won't cock. All the News Network sends $50. He says, JF and Frame, so happy together. Mr. Fahrenheit says, on the AI discussion, Frame Games allegiance becomes readily apparent. Big fan otherwise. Is there a Jewish position on AI?
No, I mean, no. I mean, I don't think so.
I don't think that there is an explicit one, but what I find myself again and again finding when discussing with Jewish people, they are overly open to the idea. I mean, I keep having these discussions with biologists, and for some reason, white Christians, they come to me and they're like, oh, Jeff, that's a grave thing. We need to stop this or something. And I have all sorts of friends who have PhDs in biology who are Jewish. And they're like, so what? I mean, we're currently dominated by DNA. We'll be dominated by bits on a hard drive. Why not try?
Jewish thing. I have to say, like, I went through that. Just one quick analogy. Like, I went through that in chess. Like, when chess computers became, like, I lived through the period when there was human supremacy, and then suddenly there was machine supremacy, and then suddenly you couldn't train chess anymore without having a chess computer doing analysis. And, you know, that was like a heartbreaking thing for like 70% of the chess world. And for me, and I guess like my community, it was always kind of like, all right, so like, okay, so now this is the thing we need to use. This is our new, like, you know, this is our new master. Okay, I can live with that. So there is kind of an aspect of that I don't know, as long as you're still like alive and in the game, you know, I don't really have so much pride about how the job gets done. But I do think that there is a Gentile like unflappable strength and a sort of you know, desire to sort of have the likeness of God in that way, that makes that, you know, an affront to your basic humanity.
All right, so I've displayed the link to the straw poll one last time in the chat while I read the last super chats. Go vote if you haven't voted yet. So we have Mr. Fahrenheit says, publish your damn book, Jeff. Yeah, it's about to come out. G.I. Jack says, sorry if my joke was awful, Jeff. Anyway, I thought Frame Games should know that after hearing him talk about forming organizations, I may have had a part in forming one that was spawned thanks to his wise words. Well, it's great to hear. As the News Network sends another $50. He says, after the phenotypic revolution, Patrick Little will stand outside the DNA factories saying that the Jewish people is responsible for making perfect humans. And then, all right. Thank you, Alze. I don't know if Patrick Little will be part of the revolution, the phenotypic revolution resistance. I would guess that he has the character for it. G.I. Jack says, Frame Games, I vote 1. The fight isn't lost until we give up. And he says,
yeah.
He also says, resist the black pills, Frame Game, resist.
Together, baby. Right? JF's on the Matrix side.
DP sends $5. He says, counted up the first 415 votes. Frame 1 categories 3-2. JF 1 overall votes 233. 183. Well, we'll see the result once they're once they have all been counted. Commissar Gulagstein says, you know, JF1 Frame Game was demoralized in the same way when an atheist backs a Christian into a corner. What is the meaning of life? Lol.
Cultural anthropology. All right. But I respect it.
We have 477 votes. And so people were really involved in this vote. Let's start with the most obvious result. We have 73 people saying I won on AI and 28 people saying Frame Games won on AI. Therefore, we have a win for JF on AI. That's 1 point. Then we have 59 people saying I won on foreign policy. And we have 32 people saying Frame Games won on foreign policy. That's another point for JF. On Trump, there is 56 people saying, because people haven't necessarily voted on all subjects. They voted for whatever subject they felt they could declare a winner, and they've abstained on others. So, Frame Games won on Trump, that's 56 votes versus JF won on Trump, 40 votes. And so that's a point for Frame Games on Trump. People saying Frame Games won on white people, that's 53 votes. And people saying JF won on white people, that's 45 votes. Very close. Frame Game gets the point. And finally, the tiebreaker. 47 people say that Frame Games won on America's domestic policy. 44 people say JF won on America's domestic policy. Frame Games wins the tiebreaker by 3 votes out of 477.
You won the popular vote. So you know what this is like? This was an excellent. I would love to run it back on some other topics. I think I like this format. I think we could actually do some more fan next time. Like I can make a trailer video. I really like this. Is enjoy. Sorry. I'll let you comment on this. This was
absolutely insane, and this is what Blood Sports was supposed to be to start with. And it was really entertaining, and I really enjoyed the discussion. As far as I'm concerned, both sides have made huge arguments today, and everyone wins.
I agree. Thanks so much, man. This has been a pleasure.
Have a great day, everyone.